So thank you, board, this evening for allowing this portion of our presentation. Kira and I have been out working. I think we've covered 5 of our 8 facilities or buildings. We're going to also hit transportation next week to share our financial projections over the next couple of years. As you know very well, we have some financial challenges ahead of us. So our game plan this year is to get that message out to our school community and our community at large, and do so this fall, early winter, build a plan to reduce cost in January and February, and execute the plan in March, April, and May. So as we all know in this room, we have some work ahead of us. This presentation is meant to not get into the weeds around our finances. Anybody, any board member, anybody in the community that would like to dig deeper into our finances, we welcome that. This is a 30,000-foot view of, what our challenges are and the why. So with that being said, next slide, please.
Okay, yeah, and again, it's been these slides are condensed and are able to send the kind of message in a quick half hour that we've been able to spend with each one of the buildings and departments to kind of share with them where we are and what our finances are going to be moving forward. So this is the slide that we look at every month. You guys are very familiar with the different enrollment, and it was actually the same slide that you saw in my beginning presentation. The big takeaway here that we wanted people to understand is that our enrollment has not 100% come back the way we'd like to see that happen. So our average head count in 1920 was 3637, and then our average in 21-22 was 3463. So there's 174 kids just across the district that haven't come back. We haven't seen the students for whatever reason, for lots of different reasons, that just haven't come back. That's in dollars right now. That's about $2 million. So that's one of our biggest, or one of our challenges is with enrollment continuing to be down. We've done lots of things to help meet the needs of all of our students, but it's just we still don't have the 174 students that we.
So with regards to enrollment, we know as a board and an administrative team in the Port Angeles School District, our response to the pandemic has been to maintain services, actually increase services with use of our ESSER funds. So unlike many districts in 2020 that rebalanced their staffing as it relates to enrollment, we did not execute that plan. We have maintained, even with a significant reduction over the last 3 years in student enrollment, we've maintained in services, and in some cases, increased services because of ESSER funds. But the time has come at the end of this school year with the with our ESSER funds to be expensed to rebalance our district based on enrollment.
So looking at our fund balance, this is the same fund balance projection that I had in my financial, our October financials. We really showing the buildings how it's so important for us to balance the budget and to maintain a fund balance that just strictly for cash flow purposes as well, so that we're able to pay our bills every month. Making sure staff understands that this isn't a savings account. We need to have this fund balance to be able to meet those contractual obligations each year. So we have also been sharing with them about our minimum fund balance policy at 7%. There's 7% of expenditures. That that as we move through through the budget season and through the year, that we balance the budget and offset our expenses with the different revenues, so that we do maintain that $4.2 to $4.6 million ending fund balance.
Yes, and I'll add to that cash flow is the issue here. We know as a board and school district, we target that $4.2 to $4.6 million as an ending fund balance, and that's really necessary as you look at our cash flow. If you take a look at the cash flow there, you can see month by month, it's fairly predictable. It's changed a little bit over the last couple of years, and I think that's expected with additional revenues from the feds, but it's fairly predictable. And if you look at the month of June, that really outlines the importance of having a beginning fund balance of 4.2 to 4.6. Because what happens in April, we know we collect our first collections of our levy, our EP&O levy, and we have a large increase in cash on hand during the month of April. The state of Washington does not equally allocate apportionment in 12 equal increments. It ranges each month by different percentages. And so what ends up happening in May and June is the apportionment from the state of Washington gets lessened as a percent. And really, I think why they do that is to force districts to spend down their fund balance as they've collected spring collections. And so really, one of the most important, it's good business to have a 7% fund balance, but one of the most important takeaways here is if we were to allow that to be $1.5 million less, so let's just say we started a year with a $3 million fund balance, there's a good chance that we couldn't pay our bills in June. We would not have cash on hand to pay our bills. So we have really set that 7% minimum fund balance as a requirement for our district, and to be fiscally solvent, that's a necessary action to maintain the cash on hand to pay our bills month to month.
Next slide. So here we have both revenues and expenditures laid out from 1920 to what's projected in 22-23. Here you can see we've worked to balance our revenues and expenditures each month. The green here is our total revenues, and the blue is total expenditures. So moving into 2021, we started using those ESSER dollars that were allocated to us in the spring of 2020. We used those funds, and that was when we started seeing the drop in enrollment. We used those funds to balance the budget, and you can see how the 2.6 helped us offset the lack of enrollment revenue at $50 million to help pay for those obligations of the $53 million in expenses. Again, in 21-22, the same thing. We spent $8.1 million in ESSER funds to offset our salary costs at $59 million. And then again, now in 2023, we've planned to use the $5.6 million to help balance the budget with our projected $60 million in expenses. As we know, it's 84% of our expenses is salary and benefits. So as Marty said earlier, we have not decreased our staffing, and it just continues to increase as we move through the year. So that 5.6 now. Of the $18 million that we were given back in 1920, we will have about exhausted all of our ESSER funds. So having balanced the budget on those ESSER funds over the last 3 years, now we have to find a way to balance that budget without the ESSER funds to So, looking forward, that's one of our challenges, is to decrease those expenditures by possibly 5.6.
Yeah, for those of you that cannot see the board, the green is total revenue, the blue is total expenditures, and the yellow are ESSER funds. Those are the emergency relief funds that we had from the feds back in 2020 for COVID. And so you can see that, you know, Carrie referenced as balance the budget. I want to provide some detail to that. It's not like we used cash on hand. This is a reimbursement model. And so we have an expense, we get reimbursed the funds that have been allocated to us by OSPI from the feds. So when we're talking about balancing the budget, we're really talking about paying salaries. Okay, because as Kara referenced, 83 to 84% of our expenditures are salaries, salary and benefits. So this is the kicker today. If I had to make a decision today, and I don't have to make the decision today, or if we had to make the decision as a board and a superintendent, what do we need to do here? We know that, you know, either you increase revenue or you decrease expenditures, okay? And to increase revenue to a district, really that comes in one form, increased enrollment. I don't see that happening this year. I have hope that maybe we'll see a little bump in enrollment mid-year semester time for our ALE program, but I think our local families and children have made their choices on where they are placed this year. So I don't see us recovering 174 students. So, you know, I don't see us increasing our total revenue. So at the end of the year, we're going to have to decrease our total expenditures. And as you can see, to create a balanced budget, that would create, because we're using $5.6 million of ESSER funds this year, that means a $5.6 million cut in expenditures. That's hefty. That's about 10%. Not quite, but about 10%. In our district, we've gone through many RIFs, reductions in cost over the course of a couple of decades. I believe this one could be the largest reduction we've seen in recent times. 10%, 1 out of every 10 is a hefty reduction. So again, we don't have to make the decision today, but if we were to make that today, it would be a $5.6 million reduction. What can help? One, increased enrollment. I don't think we can bank on that, but that could help. The other thing that could help is, legislative fixes to problems that we have experienced in our system. That is not only a problem for Port Angeles, it's a problem across the state of Washington. There are some things that we really need to advocate for ourselves this year with our legislative representatives. One, fully fund special education. It is the paramount duty of the state of Washington to fully fund basic education for students across the state of Washington. There was a McCleary decision made back in the 2010, 2011. The state executed a plan in 2018 to fully fund basic education, but they did not address special ed. When a child qualifies for special education, he or she, their basic education now includes special ed. So it is not only morally the right thing to do to fully fund special education, but it is the law. So what we have to do now, we've seen a growing, you heard Kira reference earlier that our SPED numbers continue to grow. We're at over 600 students of our system now in special education. Now, that comes in multiple means. We qualify some of those students based on qualifying qualifications, and we have many students that move into our district because we know, as the largest district on the northern end of the Olympic Peninsula, families gravitate to us because we have more services. And that's not new. So what we have to do now is, we have seen with an increased enrollment in SPED, we have seen an increased expenditure from, quite frankly, our EP&O. An EP&O, by law, is enrichment. Special education is not enrichment. Special education is basic education. Enrichment activities come in the form of music, come in the form of extra staffing for mental health, extra staffing for nurses, extra staff, or excuse me, athletic programs. You know, that's enrichment. By definition from the state of Washington, enrichment does not include basic education. For whatever reason, the state of Washington has, I'm going to be candid, has turned a blind eye and allowed expenditures when you're over budget in SPED to be taken from EP&O levies. That's absolutely wrong. So not fully funding special education is, one, I believe, a violation of the state's paramount duty, but two, forcing districts to spend down their EP&O levies, which is intended to be enrichment, on basic ed services. This problem needs to be fixed. I've been advocating for this. We've been advocating for this for 5 years, at least 5 years. The time has come. And it means nearly $2 million to this school district. I'll say that again, $2 million. We spend all of our state SPED money, all of our federal SPED money, and nearly now $2 million of our local EP&O to meet the basic needs of our special ed population. That's wrong. That's something we can't fix in this room. But we know people that can fix that. And I'm going to encourage each of us and each member of our audience to, and each member that will view this by way of virtual opportunities on social media and beyond, reach out to your legislature. It's time. It is time for fully funding of our SPED services, and that will positively impact every district of the state of Washington. We are not alone. That can help. I wish we could fix it within this room, but we can't. Another fix that could help us with a legislative fix, you know, we've talked about this now for 5 years, but the rollout and the regionalization model. I've never been a fan of regionalization. It creates a system of haves and have-nots. Regionalization, in its most simple form, is there are districts that get 18% more money than some. There are districts get 12% more money. There are districts that get 6%, and there are districts that get 0. So basically, you take your apportionment, and if you're an 18% district, you multiply it times 18%. So you get what everybody else gets times 18%. If you're a 12, that's the number. If you're a 6, that's the number. Port Angeles, like most districts across the state of Washington, are 0. We're a 0 regionalization district. So we get basic ed apportionment times nothing. Okay? The model was created based on cost of living in certain areas of the state. The 18% regionalization districts fall in King, primarily, in King, Snohomish, Pierce, and Kitsap counties. Generally speaking, the districts that reside in those regions have an 18% multiplier on their apportionment. Then you keep moving closer to Port Angeles. You get to Port Townsend and Chimacum, which are 10 and 12% respectively. You get to Sequim, which is a 6% regionalization district. You get to Port Angeles, we're 0, and everything beyond us is 0. You go across the mountains to the east side of the mountain, basically everything over there is 0. Majority of the districts across the state of Washington are 0 regionalization. I've struggled with this philosophically for 5 years. I mean, it's hard for me to understand and comprehend how a teacher or an administrator or a classified employee or a bus driver are have a multiplier on their salary because of where they live. I saw recently, a report on King 5, I think, and the average rent in Seattle school, or in Seattle, the community of Seattle, was around $2,300 for a one-bedroom, apartment. Well, if you've run current numbers in PA, if you can find a rental, you're talking similar numbers. So the good news for us is this year, the legislature they put together a work group last spring, and they've come up with some recommendations for the regionalization model. They're calling it a rebase, and the conversations that I'm hearing now are, a rebase to reset. Instead of having an 18, 12, 6, and 0, you might have an 8, 6, 4, 2, and 0. So basically, you're making the difference between a 0 and the top, you're making it less than by 10%, which is progress. That's a significant investment by the state legislature, because think about it. If you're Seattle, or you're Snohomish, or you're Tacoma, you're not going to be asked to give back 10% of your revenue. So they're going to have to bring the zeros up by 10%, which would be billions of dollars. So I don't know what they're going to do, but it's going to be worthy of our attention to listen very closely on how the legislature is handling this whole regionalization issue. So those are two things that I think the legislature needs to pay close attention to, and these are all on our legislative priorities. The third thing I want to reference today is the inequity, and I don't even think there's any conversation about this, but there needs to be a conversation at the state level. There is an inequity as it relates to local EP&O levies, and I'll explain why. The state uses a concept of property poor and property rich districts. So basically what that means is they take the total assessed valuation of a district. So they take everybody's home values, private business values, the whole value of the community. They add it up and they get a number, a sum at the end. And then they rank order districts that are alike across the state of Washington. And those on the top of the list are property rich, and those on the bottom of the list are property poor. Port Angeles is a great place to live. It's a phenomenal place. I love it here. There's no better place to live. So when I say we're classified as a property poor district, that's not meant as a slam, but that's what we are. Because our assessed valuation falls in the lower third of AVs for districts like us across the state of Washington, we're considered property poor. What does that mean to us then? Well, our most recent number, we have about $5.4 billion that we tax, in value of land in Port Angeles. And so with our local EP&O, we know that we've established that rate of $1.50. It's less now because of increased AV, but our target is at $1.50. And so you take your total assessed valuation times your millage rate of $1.50, and you get a number on the back end. For us, our local EP&O is $5.6 million of local funds. Then you can go to other districts that have higher AVs and multiply times their millage rate and get a sum. And you don't have to go to King County, you don't have to go to Pierce County, you don't have to go to Snohomish County to find a huge discrepancy of an inequity around how resources and how the tax structure is set up in the state of Washington. Because right next door in Sequim, their assessed valuation is $8 billion. What did they say ours was? 5.4. So their total assessed land is $8 billion. So they tax, their millage rate is less than ours, times $8 billion equals their sum. Their sum is somewhere in the range of $1 to $2 million more annually from their local tax base with a lesser millage rate. And there used to be a system in the state of Washington called levy equalization to make up that difference. But with the new rollout of the funding model, it's nearly impossible to find. They say it's still there, but it's nearly impossible to find the levy equalization. It's not there reflective on how it should be. So, and I'm happy for SWIM. I'm happy for districts like SWIM, to have that land to be able to tax off of. But it puts us at a distinct disadvantage. And the kicker is, not only do our tax citizens pay more and we collect less, but SQUIM has about 1,000 less students. So that structure nobody's talking about this, folks, but that structure has to be addressed. Because, again, that's a very significant inequity that we can't fix. To just raise our that's not the answer, to raise our taxes for our local citizens. So, that is on nobody's radar, but it's on my radar. It should be on our radar, because you want to talk about something we can't control, really, and that impacts our finances. That impacts our finances. The last thing I think we need to advocate for ourselves would be the state no longer uses the concept of COLA, cost of living adjustment. They use something called the IPD. And the IPD is multiplied off of the prototypical model, which we all know the prototypical model doesn't reflect what it takes to run schools. So as we know, from this last summer running our numbers, when the state allocates a 5.5% IPD, it really looks closer to us like maybe a 2.19% or at best a 2.5%. So that we need to advocate again for ourselves around, if the intent of the state is to allocate, and an IPD is intended to be a salary enhancement, that the state intends for districts to allocate as a salary enhancement to their employees, which I'm all for. But if you're going to allocate an IPD, you need to find a way to have it be more reflective of what a district actually receives in new revenue. And there's ways to do that. I'm not sitting in a legislative seat, but, instead of using just the prototypical model, you could consider things like a 5.5% increase to your SPED apportionment, a 5.5% increase to your LAP apportionment, a 5.5% increase to your high poverty LAP apportionment. That would start helping us. But for all those other programs to remain the same, and apply a 5.5% only to the IPD or only to the prototypical model, that doesn't cut it. And again, that's not a Port Angeles problem, that's a state problem. There isn't a district out there that can run a school based on the prototypical model. So, if the state truly intends on, and it was part of the McCleary decision, for salary enhancements, to be addressed by the state of Washington, not local districts, but by the state to, continue to provide enhancements necessary for cost of living adjustments, even though it's not called that anymore, then the state needs to pick up that dime. The state needs to look at how they're calling that out as an IPD increase and be able to offset the local costs that, again, come right down to this district. And where do we find that money? That difference? We find that in our local EP&O. That's our only flexible fund to be able to address, and find additional dollars to provide salary enhancements. So that needs to be addressed as well. And I've brought that up to all these items I've brought up to Chris Rechtal and to our legislators, and we just need to continue to advocate for ourselves. And again, like I say, All four of these would help a majority of districts across the state of Washington. I am all for fiscal responsibility for this district, and you, me, and Kira, we stand on our numbers. But when there are things that we can't solve at the local level, it gets to be difficult. It's a difficult pill for me to swallow. Because I can't fix SPED funding, we can't fix regionalization, we can't fix levy equalization, and we can't fix the IPD. We need our legislators to step up, because the model that they're using for the Port Angeles School District and many districts across the state of Washington is broken and it's not working. I apologize for being so brutally honest today, but the time has come. We are looking at cuts like this district have never seen before, in my opinion. Sarah, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but 10% cuts is a healthy cut. We need the legislature to step up and do what's right this year.